They told me I wasn't good enough to stand beside him, so he left me outside, in the rain, while he walked into the gala with another woman. What he didn't know? I wasn't just walking away, I was walking into something bigger. If you're into stories of betrayal, power, and flawless revenge, hit that subscribe button and join our community. You won't want to miss what happens next. He told me to wait outside. Just 5 minutes, he said. Just until the line cleared. Just until the photographers got what they needed. So I stood there, on the sidewalk, heels sinking into a crack in the concrete, rain soaking the silk of my dress. I held my clutch tight against my ribs like it could protect something inside me from breaking. It couldn't. From behind the velvet rope, I watched him. His suit perfect. His smile even more so. Cameras flashed. He laughed too loudly. Madison, his campaign manager turned date, laughed louder. They were posing for press photos as if I'd never existed. People passed by, glancing at me. A few looked concerned. Most looked away. Nobody recognized me. Not like this. Not with mascara dripping down my cheeks and my hair plastered to my face. I could still hear his last words echoing in my ears. You just wouldn't understand the image I need to project tonight. He needed Madison. Her sculpted features. Her perfectly rehearsed charisma. Not me. The woman who'd helped him build every speech, strategized every fundraiser, swallowed every insult. It was supposed to be our night. He promised, weeks ago, that this gala would be my moment too. That I'd finally be recognized. That I'd finally be seen. Instead, he left me out in the rain. And when our eyes met across the marble staircase, when he saw me standing there, soaked, humiliated, discarded, he smirked. That smirk, it burned hotter than any scream. I turned, walked away. Not because I was defeated, but because I knew something he didn't. Someone had seen me, someone who mattered far more, and their car was pulling up behind me, window rolling down. Need a ride? A voice asked. The mayor. Yeah, I used to practice being quiet, not just in conversation, but in movement, in presence. I learned how to take up less space, how to smile without interrupting, how to stand just behind him at public events so the light hit his face first. He said it made us look polished, united. Optics matter, he'd whisper before every fundraiser, and I would nod, like I understood. Maybe I did. At that point, I wasn't his equal. I was his accessory, his campaign wife, the perfect prototype. It hadn't started that way. Back when we first met, he was a junior councilman with a $3,000 suit and $80,000 in student debt. I was running communications for a nonprofit that advocated for public school funding. We met at a panel discussion about education reform. He was arrogant. I was idealistic. He made a bold claim about charter schools. I stood up and publicly corrected him, complete with citations and statistics. He loved it, said I had fire, said he needed someone who challenged him. That night, he asked if I'd get coffee with him. By the next election cycle, we were living together. He told his constituents we were a power couple. Privately, he told me not to speak unless spoken to during donor dinners. I adapted. I wore the dresses he laid out on the bed. I memorized names and political affiliations. I kept files on his enemies, his allies, and everyone in between. I wrote his social media captions, edited his speeches, ran quiet damage control when his temper slipped in front of staff. But the closer we got to real power, the more I disappeared. He told people I worked in communications, that I was between roles. He joked once at a wine and cheese mixer that I'd be a great press secretary, if she could just smile more. The room laughed. I laughed too. It was easier than letting the silence sit too long. I started keeping notes, not the kind that go in planners or campaign binders, notes about behavior, patterns of silence, patterns of disrespect, patterns of control. I never planned to use them, but I wrote them anyway. The final break didn't come all at once. It never does. It comes in slivers, thin paper cuts that bleed more than expected, like the morning he called me safe in front of his stylist, or when he said I should avoid wearing red. It commanded too much attention. Or when his mother, Patricia, brought up my fertility over brunch with donors, and he said nothing. Then came Madison, 28, Ivy League, ambitious in the way men find magnetic. He introduced her to me casually. She's brilliant, he said. Reminds me of you, 10 years ago. That's when I knew, not that she would take him, but that he wanted to be taken. He'd already replaced me in his mind. The new campaign manager wasn't just managing the campaign. She was managing the candidate. I tried to talk to him once, during a quiet Sunday breakfast. "I've been thinking about us," I said. He looked up from his phone. "Us? I want to be more involved again, like before. The messaging, the outreach." He cut me off. "I need you to focus on presentation right now, not strategy. It's important that we look stable, cohesive, like a team." The irony wasn't lost on me. I nodded, quietly, practicing the performance of agreement once again. But something inside me was changing, slowly, steadily, like water seeping into the cracks of old concrete. You don't notice it at first, but given enough time, it will break the foundation. Later that week, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying myself. I still looked like me, but I didn't feel like me. I wiped away the lipstick he preferred, put on the blazer he said made me look too serious, tied my hair the way he said reminded him of our early days, the ones before he saw me as competition. Then I sat down at my desk, opened a new notebook, and wrote, "Step 1, reclaim your story." And just like that, the campaign I had been building for him was over. Mine had just begun. Our house had too many mirrors. When we first moved in, he said it was to make the space feel bigger, brighter, more impressive. But after a while, it felt like the mirrors were watching me, like they were keeping score, of how often I pretended, of how little he looked at me anymore, of how many nights I fell asleep alone in a king-sized bed that once held whispers and now held distance. The campaign was in full swing. City council was behind him, and now he was aiming higher, state senate. It wasn't ambition that bothered me. I'd always admired his drive. What hollowed me out was the way he became someone else entirely when chasing it. Someone colder, calculated, almost mechanical. Every morning he was out the door by 6. Every night he returned after 10, if he returned at all. At first I believed the schedule. The late-night meetings, the closed-door strategy sessions, the media training weekends out of town. But that belief began to rot the moment I saw the second phone. He forgot it once, left it charging in the guest bathroom, the one he said he never used. It was locked, but the wallpaper said everything. A photo of Madison, her hand on his chest, his tie crooked like she'd just pulled it. I stared at the image for a full minute, not crying, not gasping, just still. I think part of me had been waiting for that confirmation. I didn't confront him. Not then. Not yet. That would have given him power, control over the narrative, and I was done giving him the power to define the story. Instead, I moved with precision. I started scanning every piece of campaign literature, not with love, but with legal curiosity. Whose name was on the print orders? Who paid for the ad spots? Who approved the messaging? Everything he did left a paper trail. Everything Madison touched was archived somewhere. My background in communications finally became useful, just not in the way he'd hoped. In public, I remained perfect. I attended events. I smiled. I wore the right dress. I stood where I was told. They took pictures of us and posted them with captions like, "A power couple to watch," and I let them. But behind the scenes, I became something else. Not a wife, not a victim. A documentarian. Every email. Every suspicious expense. Every policy memo where my edits had been used without credit. I cataloged everything. My Google Drive had more folders than his campaign HQ. And I waited. I waited while the bed grew colder, while he started locking his laptop, while Madison's toothbrush mysteriously showed up in our guest bathroom drawer. I waited when he stopped touching me at all, not out of cruelty, but out of disinterest. Once I tried to initiate intimacy, thinking maybe, just maybe, the version of us I remembered was still under the surface. He turned away. "Don't start something you're not going to finish," he said flatly. That was the night I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the nightstand. He didn't notice, or maybe he did, and that silence was his way of agreeing we were over, without the inconvenience of saying it aloud. Days turned into weeks. The election neared. He grew more frantic. And then one night, something shifted. He came home with a bottle of wine, Chinese takeout, a forced smile. "Thought we could eat together tonight," he said. I nodded, surprised but cautious. We sat on the couch, watched a documentary about political scandals. The irony wasn't lost on me. Halfway through, he paused the TV and looked at me. "You're not happy," he said. "I can feel it." I stared at him, at the man who'd ignored every signal for a year. "I'm not a fool," he continued. "But this election is everything. Just, let's get through it. After that, we'll figure things out." It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging the fracture. but all I heard was a negotiation. Stay useful until I don't need you. I smiled. I nodded. I played the role I knew so well. But that night, I made my own phone call to someone who knew how political optics really worked. And that's how I found myself, 2 weeks later, sitting across from the mayor's wife in a quiet cafe in Beacon Hill. She had heard of me. More importantly, she had watched me, at events, from a distance, behind the polished glint of power. "I think you're smarter than he gives you credit for," she said after our second cappuccino. "And I think you're more dangerous than you realize." She wasn't warning me. She was offering me a door, and I was done waiting in rooms where no one saw me. Manin, there's a secret society in politics, not the kind with handshakes or hidden rooms, but the kind made of women who have spent years behind men who take credit for everything they touch. You don't find them on podiums or campaign posters. You find them in corners, at coat checks, beside buffet tables at donor galas, eyes sharp, voices soft, minds like chessboards. They watch everything. They remember even more, and they never forget who tried to erase them. I never thought I'd be one of them. But once the mayor's wife invited me in, the curtain lifted, and behind it I found a network I didn't know existed. Powerful women in modest roles, strategists disguised as assistants, whistleblowers dressed like decorators. Over cappuccinos and closed-door lunches, they taught me things my husband never bothered to explain, not because I couldn't understand them, but because he needed to believe I wasn't capable. They showed me how favors were tracked like currency, how coincidental endorsements were always pre-negotiated, how alliances lived not in press releases, but in private texts exchanged over glassware polishing conversations at charity events. "You don't need to become one of the men to beat them," the mayor's wife said one day. "You just have to stop hiding in their shadows." So I stopped. I began shifting my presence, just slightly at first, small enough not to trigger suspicion. At events, I started standing beside donors instead of behind my husband. I asked questions, smart ones, the kind they weren't used to hearing from the wife. They noticed. A few even pulled me aside to ask if I had ever considered running for office myself. I smiled and deflected, but inside something stirred. A sense of self I thought had been buried beneath years of suppression and performance. At home, he didn't notice. He was too consumed with his own image, too distracted by Madison's growing role in his campaign, and I suspected, in his personal life. One evening, I came home to find him pacing in the kitchen, yelling into his phone. "She's just a placeholder," he snapped. "The optics are good, but she's not the long-term solution." He paused, listening, then added, "No, I'm not talking about Valentina. I'm talking about Madison." I stood silently in the hallway, heart pounding, ears burning. I wasn't sure which was worse, being demoted to placeholder, or realizing he saw all women that way. The next morning, I began rewriting the script. First, I called back every woman who had ever handed me a business card and said, "If you ever need anything," then I made a list, not of enemies, but of witnesses, people who had seen the inner workings of his campaign, volunteers, interns, former consultants, people he had underestimated or discarded. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted clarity. One by one, I scheduled coffees, Zoom calls, catch-up brunches. I asked questions about timelines, decision-making, expenses that didn't quite add up. I took notes. So many notes. My folders multiplied. My drive grew heavier. But more than that, my confidence grew sharper. These women didn't just remember. They felt. They felt the sting of being sidelined, the exhaustion of being dismissed, the rage of being thanked for work that was later claimed by someone louder in the room. Each story gave me something more powerful than data: resolve. I realized something chilling one afternoon while reading an email chain between Madison and a donor I had personally cultivated over years. She was offering access, promising introductions, speaking in a tone that mimicked mine almost word for word. She wasn't just replacing me. She was wearing my skin, but the mask never fits quite right when it's stolen. There are always cracks. She forgot things I never would, called people by the wrong title, overpromised deliverables, misquoted polling data, tiny errors, insignificant to someone who only cared about appearances. But I noticed, and so did others. Whispers began to circulate at events. That Madison was smart, yes, but green, unpolished, overeager. That the campaign's tone had shifted, and not for the better. I never corrected anyone. I just kept smiling, nodding, observing. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a quiet fundraiser, invite only, held in a garden behind a Beacon Hill brownstone. The mayor himself was there, mingling, drink in hand, shaking hands with city council members and future judges. I was introduced not as the candidate's wife, but as the woman who kept that campaign from collapsing 2 years ago. The phrase landed like a soft explosion. The mayor laughed. "I've heard that more than once," he said, looking at me with a knowing expression. "I'd love to hear your perspective sometime, privately." And then, as if the universe needed to punctuate the moment, my husband arrived, late, disheveled, Madison trailing behind him like a second shadow. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, his expression flickered. Confusion, surprise, and something else. Something almost like fear. That's when I knew. He hadn't noticed the power shifting because he didn't believe I had any. And now, it was too late. It started with a whisper, a low voice behind a linen curtain at the governor's mixer. I wasn't meant to hear it. I was just trying to find the restroom. But when I passed by the 2 women chatting quietly over a half-finished tray of shrimp cocktail, one name froze me in my tracks. Madison. "She's overstepping," one said. "Pitched a policy platform directly to the senator's aide. Skipped the comms director entirely." The other side. "Typical. Trying to move up too fast. If she thinks she's the next first lady, she's delusional." They laughed. Not cruelly, but knowingly. Like people who'd seen the same mistake play out 100 times. Women like Madison came and went, but women like them stayed. I stepped into the bathroom and locked the stall. Not to cry, not to gloat, but to breathe, because that whisper told me everything I needed to know. Madison was slipping. She wasn't just arrogant. She was reckless. And in politics, recklessness is fatal. Not immediately, but slowly, like blood loss you don't notice until you collapse. Back at home, I played the role again. Dinner, questions about his schedule, light conversation about the latest polling numbers. He barely looked at me. His answers were clipped, his eyes fixed on his phone. "You're distracted," I said gently. "Just campaign stuff," he muttered. "Tight window for the endorsement meeting tomorrow. With the State Business League?" He looked up, surprised. "How do you know about that?" I smiled. "I read things." He nodded slowly, suspicion clouding his face. Then he shrugged. "Madison's handling it. She's a shark with these guys." A shark. Yes, but even sharks bleed. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Business League's media history, scanned the photos from past events. There she was, 4 rows deep, behind the candidate she'd managed 2 years ago, the one who lost embarrassingly, and not just because of poor strategy. There had been rumors, misappropriated funds, conflict of interest, NDAs signed in haste, and suddenly, a pattern began to emerge. I made a list. 3 campaigns in 5 years. None of her candidates won. All of them had glowing starts and quiet, scandal-tinged endings. 2 had publicly thanked their staff, but omitted her name. She was charming, yes, smart, confident, but she left smoke wherever she went. And now that smoke was curling into our lives. One afternoon, I stopped by the campaign office unannounced. A calculated move. I brought muffins. Everyone loves the woman who brings muffins. The staff looked surprised. Not hostile, just confused. Like they had forgotten I existed. Madison wasn't there, but her desk was. Cluttered, chaotic, lined with luxury brand notepads and a planner with names I recognized. High-level donors, policy influencers, lobbyists, all listed beside strange abbreviations. ST, DC, RSV. I took mental snapshots, every detail, every pattern. Later, I messaged one of the former campaign managers she'd worked with, a woman named Eliza. We'd met once, briefly, at a fundraiser. I sent a casual note. "Hey, I think we share a Madison connection. Curious to hear your experience. Off the record, of course." Eliza replied within an hour. I was waiting for this. What followed was a flood. Documents, emails, screenshots. A strategy memo that had mysteriously reappeared, word for word, in my husband's campaign plan, but credited to Madison. Eliza had kept everything. She said Madison had a pattern of co-opting ideas, taking shortcuts, and building influence by seduction rather than results. "She's brilliant, but volatile," Eliza wrote. "She knows how to impress men in power, but eventually, they all realize she's not building a house. She's hanging wallpaper over cracks." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I read the emails again. Then I saved them, printed them, added them to the ever-growing binder I kept in my locked drawer. A binder labeled, innocuously, transition planning, because I wasn't planning an exit anymore. I was planning a transfer of power. The next week, I made a quiet appearance at a civic leadership brunch, an event I used to attend as his date. This time I went alone. Or rather, with intent. I wore a navy blue blazer. No jewelry, no husband. The mayor's wife saw me first. "Valentina," she said warmly, pulling me in for a kiss on the cheek. "I was hoping you'd show up." Others followed. Handshakes, smiles, curious glances, and questions. "You're still involved in the campaign? What's your take on the messaging shift? Has the team considered a pivot on education policy?" I answered each one calmly, authoritatively, like someone who belonged there. Because I did. It wasn't arrogance. It was reclamation. And by the time I walked out of that brunch, 3 different people had offered to introduce me to consultants and press contacts for my own ventures. Not his. Mine. The next night, I came home to find Madison in our living room, shoes off, wine glass in hand, laughing at something he said. They both turned when they saw me. She smiled, but her eyes tightened. "Valentina, I didn't know you'd be home." "I live here," I replied smoothly. My husband cleared his throat. "We were just reviewing next week's debate prep." I nodded, glancing at the wine. "I'm sure that's productive." The air thickened. Something unsaid passed between all 3 of us. I walked to the hallway but paused before disappearing. "Oh," I said casually. "By the way, the Business League declined the meeting, said they had concerns about prior conflicts of interest." Madison's smile faltered. My husband blinked. "What? Who told you that?" I turned slowly. A little whisper, from someone who actually pays attention to women behind the curtain. And then I went to bed, alone, but not empty, not anymore. La so. The line came at a fundraiser, not from a stranger, not whispered behind a napkin or muttered in a corner. It came from him, my husband, into my ear, right after I introduced myself to the governor's chief of staff. "You're not mayor's wife material," he said, with a smile on his face and a flute of champagne in his hand, as if it were a joke between friends, a private jab between allies, something light, something forgettable. But I didn't forget, because I felt it sink, like glass shattering inside my ribcage. I don't remember what I said in response. Maybe I laughed. Maybe I blinked. Maybe I turned to greet someone else with a frozen smile. But inside, I detonated. Not because I wanted to be the mayor's wife, but because he thought I wanted only that. Because after everything I'd built, every speech I ghost wrote, every donor I cultivated, every reputation I saved, he still saw me as an accessory, a background detail, a placeholder until someone flashier stepped in. That night, I lay in bed beside him, facing the ceiling. He fell asleep quickly, breathing steady. I watched the slow rise and fall of his chest and wondered how many women had stared at the same ceiling, feeling just as erased. The next morning, I made a decision. No more quiet power. No more smiling from the sidelines. No more waiting for validation from men who needed me invisible. It was time to stop planning a comeback. It was time to build something entirely mine. The first thing I did was call Eleanor Patterson. She wasn't a politician. She was what politicians feared. A communications strategist with a reputation for making candidates or breaking them. I'd met her once, years ago, when I helped organize a city council debate. Back then, she wore sunglasses indoors and chewed ice like it owed her money. "Valentina Blackwood," she said when she answered. "Didn't expect your name to pop up on my phone." "I need an hour," I replied. "You have 15 minutes," she said. "Start talking." I did. Not everything. Not the marriage. But enough. I told her I had policy ideas, experience, research, relationships, that I'd written for elected officials without credit, that I was done being a ghost, that I wanted a name, my name, on something real. She didn't say much at first, just listened, tapped keys in the background. Then, "What are you looking for, Valentina? A consulting gig? A column? A PAC?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "I want credibility, visibility, and eventually, independence." There was a long pause. "You have timing," she said. "The city's tired of polished men with polished wives. They want voices, brains, something different. I might have something for you. Stay reachable." She hung up, and just like that, the air changed. I stood by the window for a while, watching traffic crawl through Back Bay. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, sharper, straighter. Not a campaign wife, not a placeholder, just a woman standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. And the next week, he brought Madison to a public event, not as a staffer, as a date. It was a gala at the downtown museum. She wore silver, tight, loud. She clung to his arm like victory. Reporters smiled at her. Men noticed her. Women judged her. And through it all, she smiled like someone who had won something, but didn't know the price tag yet. I watched them from across the room, not hiding, not reacting. Because here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you freedom. To move, to act, to strike. One of the donors, a woman named Corinne I'd worked with during the first campaign, slid up beside me. "You look serene," she said. I smiled. "Serenity's underrated." She nodded toward Madison. "That's temporary." "Isn't everything?" I replied. She laughed, then leaned in. "You know we all know, right?" I blinked. "Know what? That you wrote the education bill, not him." I didn't answer. Didn't have to. "I'm glad you're done playing small," she added. "We've missed your voice." And then she walked away, leaving me there, still, but burning. At home later that night, he came in late, smelled like bourbon and cheap perfume. His tie was loose, his eyes glassy. He opened the fridge, poured a glass of water, leaned on the counter like the weight of the campaign finally hit him. I sat at the table, silent, waiting. When he noticed me, he exhaled like I was the problem, like my presence was the thing dragging him down. "We need to talk," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Do we?" He set the glass down too hard. "You've been cold, distant, judging everything." "Interesting," I said. "I thought I was just being quiet, like always." He rubbed his face. "This race is everything. I can't have distractions." I stood up, slowly, walked to the hallway, then turned back. "I'm not a distraction," I said calmly. "I'm the infrastructure you've been leaning on." He scoffed. "If that's true, why aren't you the one running?" And there it was, the question. The mirror turned on him. I didn't answer, not out loud, because the real answer was already in motion. In emails sent, meetings scheduled, whispers planted. The foundation was shifting beneath him, and he hadn't even noticed. He would, soon. And the elevator broke between the 22nd and 23rd floors of the Tremont building. I was on my way to a networking luncheon hosted by a civic engagement nonprofit, a group I had once volunteered for during my early 20s, back when I still believed in politics without politics. I had dressed carefully, sleek, neutral, polished but unremarkable. The kind of outfit that doesn't invite attention but doesn't look like hiding either. When the elevator jolted and stopped dead mid-floor, I exhaled sharply and pressed the emergency button. Then I glanced sideways at the only other passenger. She was already looking at me. "The doors won't open until maintenance gets the override," she said with calm authority, like someone who had been stuck in elevators before. Her voice was smooth, seasoned. Not the kind that filled rooms, but the kind that quieted them. That's when I realized who she was. Claire Dwyer, wife of Mayor Thomas Dwyer. Cambridge-born, Wellesley-educated, former CEO of a green tech firm she'd exited quietly before her husband's first election win. Rumors said she still pulled strings behind his speeches, budget proposals, and personnel choices. But she never stood at a podium, never gave interviews. She existed like gravity, unseen, but undeniable. She turned slightly toward me. "You're Valentina Blackwood, aren't you?" I stiffened. "Yes." She offered a hand. "Claire." I took it, momentarily stunned by the grip. Firm, exact, unapologetic. We stood in silence for a moment while the elevator hummed uselessly around us. Then she spoke again, casually. "I've seen you at events. You used to be much closer to the candidate." I smiled politely. "Campaign dynamics change." She nodded. "So do optics. But I always found you more compelling." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a test. Maybe both. "Funny thing about political wives," she continued, brushing a stray thread from her sleeve. "People assume we're just background, but the smartest ones are always archiving, always assessing." I studied her face, elegant but unadorned. She didn't need sparkle. She was the substance. "I'm not sure I'm anyone's wife anymore," I said before I could stop myself. Claire's eyes flicked toward me, sharp, but not unkind. Even better. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was weighted, meaningful. She wasn't filling space. She was measuring it. Finally, I asked, "Do you ever miss being visible?" She tilted her head. "Visibility is overrated. Influence is quieter, more permanent." That answer settled into me like a seed. 10 minutes later, the elevator resumed its climb. When the doors finally opened, she stepped out first, but then paused. "You're coming to the reception tonight at the Baymont Library?" I hadn't been invited. I knew the event. It was closed door, high donor, no media, the kind of night where backroom deals wore cocktail dresses and policy priorities were swapped like hors d'oeuvres. "No," I said. "Not on the list." She gave me a faint smile. "You are now." That evening, I stood outside the Baymont Library in a charcoal wrap dress I hadn't worn in over a year. It fit differently now, not tighter or looser, but more accurate, like it finally belonged to the version of me that had earned it. Inside, the event was already in motion. Soft music, gentle laughter, expensive glassware. I expected to feel like an intruder. Instead, I moved through the room like I had always belonged. Claire saw me immediately. She didn't wave. She didn't call attention. She just nodded, ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgement between equals. Within an hour, I was deep in conversation with a city health commissioner about biotechnology grants. A lobbyist interrupted to say he remembered my speech notes from a town hall 3 years prior. A foundation director asked if I'd consider joining their next roundtable. No one asked where my husband was. No one asked about Madison. No one questioned why I was alone, because I wasn't performing anymore. I was present, and people feel that difference. Toward the end of the evening, Claire and I stood near the arched windows, watching the city blink to life under the night sky. "You're building something," she said softly. I nodded. "Piece by piece. Don't rush it," she advised. "The women who last in this city, they don't explode into power. They slip into it, unnoticed, until they're undeniable." I turned to her. "Is that how you did it?" She took a sip of her wine and smiled with closed lips. "Still doing it." And then, just as calmly as she had appeared, she vanished into a group of council aides discussing municipal zoning policy. And when I returned home that night, the apartment was quiet. He wasn't there. A text blinked on my phone. "Running late. Madison's car broke down. Helping her out." I didn't respond. I walked into my office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. Then, I drafted a new file. Visibility plan, Phase 1. And I began writing. Not as a wife, not as a strategist, but as the next version of me. The one who would never again wait for permission to be seen. And the phrase echoed for days. "You deserve your own stage." Claire had said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather or recommending a restaurant. But those 5 words lodged themselves under my skin, refusing to be shaken loose, because no one had ever said that to me. Not in graduate school, where professors praised my research but urged me to consider industry roles instead of academia. Not in my marriage, where my intelligence was useful, but only when it served his ambitions. Not even in my own mind, where I'd always treated my success as something secondary, something that made me valuable to others, but not necessarily to myself. That week, I opened my journal and wrote it at the top of the page. "You deserve your own stage." Then I started mapping one. Not a literal stage, not yet, but a platform, a presence, a place to speak from where I wasn't a footnote in someone else's story. Step 1, visibility. Step 2, credibility. Step 3, autonomy. I began by showing up, everywhere. Conferences, roundtables, civic events. I stopped waiting for invitations and started calling in favors. The kinds of connections I had helped build during years of silent labor now owed me quiet debts. I cashed them in carefully. Each time I spoke at a forum or offered commentary during a panel discussion, I felt the shift. People stopped asking, "Isn't she married to?" and started saying, "You should talk to Valentina about that." Even more telling, Madison noticed. It began with a sharp glance across a room, then a too-sweet comment in a ladies' restroom, then a not-so-subtle jab during a campaign meeting that I wasn't even supposed to attend, but showed up at anyway, at the personal request of a donor. "You've certainly been active lately," she said with a glossy smile. "Networking hard? Engaging," I replied, sipping my coffee. "There's a difference," she blinked, then laughed. "Of course. Just don't burn out. Public engagement isn't for everyone. I'll keep that in mind," I said, standing. Though I found authenticity travels further than polish. Later that night, my husband pulled me aside at home. "Madison said you've been stepping on her toes. I raised an eyebrow. Funny. I thought she was wearing my shoes. He didn't appreciate that. She's trying to protect the campaign, he said. You showing up unannounced makes people uncomfortable. It sends mixed messages. I folded my arms. Uncomfortable. Like seeing a woman you once relied on suddenly show up with her own voice. That kind of discomfort. His jaw tensed. This isn't about you. But it was. He just didn't know it yet. 2 days later, Claire invited me to lunch. Not at a hotel. Not at a city office. At her home. It was quiet, sunlit, and deceptively warm, filled with fresh flowers and worn leather chairs that looked like they had heard every kind of secret. We sat by a bay window overlooking the Charles River. She poured me chamomile tea like we were old friends. Though I knew better. This wasn't friendship. This was recognition. I've been watching, she said. You're gaining ground. I smiled slightly. Not enough to be seen as a threat. Not yet, she agreed. Which is why now is the moment to move. Move where? To your own lane. Something parallel. Not competing with him. Exceeding him. I tilted my head. You think I should run? She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a list. Names, contacts, a note, mentors, donors, strategists, trustworthy. I think you should build, she said. Start with a podcast, a column, something policy-focused, women-centered, then a non-profit initiative, civic engagement or education, something with legs. I read the list again. These weren't entry-level names. These were kingmakers. Why are you helping me? I asked. Claire set her cup down, eyes focused, voice low. Because women like us don't get asked to step forward. We have to decide to. And when one does, it gives the rest of us permission. She leaned closer. And because I want to watch you win. That night, I stood in front of my closet and stared at a row of blazers I hadn't touched in years. They all looked like costumes now, like pieces of a version of me I'd long outgrown. So I boxed them. And in their place, I hung 3 new pieces I'd picked up earlier that day. A structured navy suit, a deep burgundy blouse, and a pair of heels that said, "Don't mistake me for anyone else." Then I sat at my desk and opened a blank Word document titled, Pilot Episode, The Politics of Silence. It would be the first installment in a podcast I hadn't publicly announced yet, one that would feature conversations with overlooked women in local government, policy, science, and education. Not flashy, not political gossip, just voices that had been muted too long, and mine among them. When I submitted the idea to a well-connected media partner, the reply came back in hours. Smart, sharp, timely. When can we record? I stared at the message and felt something unusual. Certainty, not fear, not anxiety, just the quiet knowing that I was finally stepping where I belonged. Not on his arm, not in his echo, but on my own stage. And it wasn't made of lights or applause. It was made of truth. So, the envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Thick cardstock, gold embossing, elegant, almost regal. The kind of invitation that wasn't sent via email or courier, but delivered, like a message from royalty or a warning. It was addressed to Mr. Dominic Blackwood and guest. Not Mr. and Mrs., not Dominic and Valentina, just him, and whoever he chose to bring. I held the envelope for a full minute before opening it, the edges digging into my palm. Inside was the invitation to the annual Leaders of Tomorrow Gala, the most exclusive political fundraising event in the state. Black tie, 6-figure plates, a press blackout so that private power could move uninterrupted. It was the event Dominic had obsessed over for months. If I get FaceTime with the mayor and the state chair, he'd said, I'm untouchable. At the time, I had nodded, taking notes, planning outfits, budgeting for hair and makeup, like the supportive campaign wife I used to be. Now I was a ghost in his calendar. Still, I hadn't expected the exclusion to sting as much as it did. Not because I wanted to go, but because I had earned that space, helped build the narrative, the donor list, the alliances that made him worthy of such a room. And now I was being written out of it like a typo. But something shifted when I turned the envelope over. In the corner, embossed lightly in gold, was a seal I recognized. Not the campaign committee, not the party. It was the mayor's office. And suddenly I realized someone had wanted me to see it. And that evening, while Dominic showered, I opened my laptop and drafted a message. Not to him, to her, Claire. Subject, Gala, and a favor. I kept it brief, direct. Told her I'd seen the invitation, that I understood the message, that I wasn't surprised, but that I was no longer content to remain in the background. She responded in under 15 minutes. Subject: done. Message: you'll be walking in with the right person, just not him. Wear red. C. And the days leading up to the gala moved like smoke. Slow, disorienting, thick with tension. Dominic didn't mention the invitation, didn't say whether I was coming, didn't ask if I had a dress or what I thought of the seating chart. Instead, he moved around the apartment like a man living alone, texted constantly, took calls in the hallway, laughed too easily at jokes I wasn't told. Then, the night before the event, I heard him on the phone in the kitchen. Low voice, sharp tone, impatient. No, she's not coming. It's complicated. Madison, stop. You know how this works. I stepped back before he noticed I'd been listening. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew. Well, the day of the gala arrived cold and clear. Perfect fall air, the kind that makes the city feel cinematic. Golden leaves, sharp heels on pavement, the hush of wind through brownstones. I dressed slowly, intentionally. The red gown Claire had suggested. Structured, striking, impossible to ignore. Hair pinned back, earrings simple, eyes sharp. When Dominic left the apartment, he didn't say goodbye, just adjusted his cufflinks, checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, and walked out. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't care, but someone else did. At 7:42 p.m., as Dominic and Madison made their staged arrival in front of the grand staircase of the Hartsfield Hall, a black car pulled up to the side entrance. The mayor stepped out first, then turned, extended a hand, and helped me out. We didn't speak as we walked up the side steps. No cameras, no crowd, just polished marble underfoot and power pulsing in the silence. At the top of the stairs, Claire was waiting. "You're late," she said, smiling. "Perfect." She handed me a glass of champagne and nodded toward the ballroom doors. "He's already inside." I took a slow breath. "Ready?" Claire's eyes sparkled. "He isn't. But you are." Sakya Sankuna. At the moment I stepped into the ballroom, time slowed. Hundreds of eyes, glittering chandeliers, $1,000 string quartet humming in the background, waiters in white gloves, donors in black tuxedos, and at the far end of the room, Dominic, his arm around Madison, laughing, performing, until he saw me. His smile froze, his eyes widened, and I swear, just for a moment, the air left his lungs, because I wasn't standing alone. The mayor's hand rested lightly on my back. Claire walked just behind us like a strategist returning her queen to the board, and I was glowing. Not with revenge, with arrival. People began to whisper, first quietly, then louder. Reporters turned. Donors took notice. The mayor introduced me, not as Dominic's wife or the ex-campaign spouse, but as Dr. Valentina Blackwood, policy analyst, civic strategist, and soon-to-be host of the city's most anticipated political podcast. There was applause. Actual applause. Madison blinked rapidly. Dominic clenched his jaw. I didn't look away, because for the first time in years, I didn't need to. I hadn't stolen the spotlight. I had built it, and I wasn't stepping into someone else's moment. I was walking into mine. Now it wasn't supposed to rain that night. The forecast had promised clear skies, a perfect 68 degrees. But Boston is like politics, always pretending to be predictable, right until the moment everything shifts. By 9:15 p.m., the wind had turned. By 9:32, the sky opened. By 10 odds, it was a downpour, and I was standing outside the gala alone, soaked, mascara running, dress clinging to my skin like regret, but not because I had been left behind. This was before the mayor's car, before Claire's whispered plan, before everything changed. This was the moment he made his final decision, and I let him. 2 hours earlier, I had been dressed and ready. Red gown, matching heels, hair perfect. I had waited by the door, clutching my wrap, hoping he would say something. Ask me to come, lie to me even, something to make me feel like I hadn't vanished entirely. Instead, he looked at me the way you look at hotel furniture. Polite, temporary, impersonal. "You don't need to be there tonight," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "It's our donor base," I replied softly. "People I built relationships with." "I know," he said, "but Madison's better for the room." There it was. No hesitation. Just the cold arithmetic of optics. I nodded. because crying would have given him a victory, because pleading would have made me small. So I let him go. But I followed, not in his car, not announced, just present. I stood across the street from the main entrance under the dim light of a shuttered bookstore, rain beginning to mist, later becoming sheets of cold water that blurred the marble steps into something mythical. I watched him step out of the car, Madison beside him. Her dress clung to her like a second skin. His hand rested on her back like it once did on mine. Cameras flashed. Paparazzi leaned forward. Their laughter echoed against the wet sidewalk. And then, as they turned to ascend the steps, he saw me. Our eyes locked, and he smirked. Not cruelly, not gleefully, just smug, as if to say, "You stayed too long, and I've moved on." It wasn't rage that filled me. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was clarity. For 5 years, I had measured myself by his ambition, shrunk to fit his schedule, smiled through his condescension, protected his image at the expense of my own. And now, in the rain, mascara dripping, shoes soaked, I realized the most important thing. I wasn't broken. I was free. I turned to walk away, the rain heavier now, blurring the streetlights into watercolor halos. My wrap was useless, my heels slipping on the wet concrete. Then I heard it. A car pulling up beside me, a window sliding down, and a voice, warm, amused, intentional. "You're going to catch pneumonia walking around looking like poetic justice." It was the mayor, behind the wheel, no driver, like he'd come himself. "Get in," he said, "before you make the rest of us look irrelevant." I hesitated, not out of fear, out of timing. This wasn't how I planned the reveal, but maybe that was the point. Real power doesn't follow the plan. It rewrites it. I got in. The seat was warm. The interior smelled like leather and lavender. He glanced at me. "You know, I've had 100 people try to get my attention this week, but only one managed it, standing in the rain, wearing fire." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He reached into the console and handed me a cloth napkin. I dabbed my face, steadied my breath. "You ready to walk in with me?" he asked, parking outside the side entrance. I looked at him. "Why me?" "Because Madison is a distraction," he said. "But you? You're a narrative." And we entered through a private hall, past security who didn't question us. At the top of the stairs, Claire waited. She handed me a flute of champagne like a weapon. As we crossed the ballroom, heads turned. Conversations paused. Flashbulbs started again, confused but eager. Dominic froze mid-laugh. His smile faltered. Madison glanced between us like she'd just realized the joke had turned. The mayor leaned toward a donor and whispered, "She's one to watch." And I didn't even flinch, because I wasn't dripping rainwater anymore. I was dripping inevitability. And by the time I left that night, my phone had 12 new contacts, 7 meeting requests, 2 podcast sponsors, and 1 message from Dominic. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. Let him sit in the aftermath. Let him wonder how it all flipped. Because the truth was simple. He left me in the rain, but the storm had always been mine. And the interior of the mayor's car didn't just smell expensive. It felt confidential. Black leather, seamless stitching, polished wood trim, no screens flashing political slogans, no driver offering small talk. Just silence, warmth, and the low hum of the engine. The kind of silence that demands honesty, or buries it deeper. I sat in the passenger seat, still drying from the rain, mascara mostly gone, adrenaline still pulsing in my wrists. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. Outside, the Gala was still in full bloom. Champagne flowed, strings played, deals were being whispered into the darkness. But inside this car, a different negotiation was unfolding. "You handled that beautifully," the mayor finally said, eyes still on the windshield. "What part?" I asked. "The mascara meltdown or the walk of shame into the spotlight?" He chuckled softly. "The part where you didn't flinch. That's what people remember." I leaned back against the seat, muscles unclenching for the first time in days, weeks, maybe years. "This wasn't my plan," I admitted. "Not like this." He glanced at me. "You think I ever planned to run for office? I was a prosecutor. I liked paperwork and putting bad people in worse suits behind bars. And then someone opened a door. "Claire?" I guessed. He nodded. "She sees everything 10 minutes before it happens, sometimes longer." "She said you needed a narrative," I murmured. "I need you to control your own narrative," he corrected, "before someone else writes it for you again." I looked out the window. Rain still tapped the glass in gentle staccato. Inside the ballroom, I saw Dominic, stiff, scanning the room, looking for me. "I think he's finally afraid," I said. The mayor nodded. "Good. That means he knows you're real." He turned toward me then, fully. No pretense, no calculation, just presence. "You do know this doesn't end here, right?" he said, walking into a gala, stunning them into silence. "That's not the finish line." "I know," I replied. "It's just the prologue." A beat passed. Then he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a folder. I asked Claire to draft something. Consider it unofficial, but viable. I opened it. Inside, a proposal. Media exposure plans. Speaking circuit schedules. Names of organizations looking for board members, guest lecturers, thought leaders, and one slot for a civic engagement fellowship in D.C. I looked up sharply. "I'm not a candidate," I said. "I'm not even—" "You're more than that," he interrupted. "You're a voice. And you've got two options right now. You can burn your past or build something that outlasts it." I traced the edge of the paper. "And what do you get out of this?" He smiled. "A city where power isn't always inherited, and a reminder to everyone else that some women don't need permission to rise." Outside, Dominic was now arguing with Madison. She had clearly caught on. Her face flushed, her hands sharp in gesture. He looked cornered. "How poetic," I murmured. "He left me outside his gala, and now he's locked out of his own narrative." The mayor followed my gaze. "He underestimated you. They always do." I closed the folder and turned back to him. "What happens next?" He shrugged. "Whatever you decide. But you don't get to disappear again." And I realized then, this car wasn't just a ride. It was a threshold, not between old roles and new ones, between being a name in someone else's headline and writing my own. And later that night, when I returned home, the apartment was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't call out for him. I walked straight to the desk in my office, pulled out my notebook, and flipped to the page where Claire's words were written in all caps. "You deserve your own stage." And beneath it, I wrote, "And I just took my first step onto it." Dominic texted again. "We seriously need to talk." I turned off my phone, because the woman he wanted to talk to, she didn't exist anymore. Claire never invited anyone to dinner lightly, not even people she liked, especially not people she respected. She once said, "Dinner is intimacy disguised as ritual. You don't just feed people, you study them." So when I got the message, a single line text, 7 p.m., Maison Rive, no makeup, no excuses, I knew it wasn't about food. It was about strategy. Maison Rive wasn't the kind of place you stumbled into. Hidden beneath a brownstone on Commonwealth Ave, it didn't advertise, didn't post hours, and certainly didn't welcome reservations from anyone who had to ask for the price. It was where policy met legacy over duck confit and $300 wine pairings. When I walked in, the host didn't ask for my name. He simply nodded, took my coat and whispered, "She's waiting." Claire sat in a corner booth, hair pinned back, no jewelry, sipping a glass of something amber and still. The menu lay untouched in front of her. "You wore black," she said approvingly, without looking up. "Good. No distractions." I slid into the booth. "You said no makeup. That's aggressive," she smiled. "I wanted to see what kind of armor you'd wear instead." I smirked. "Confidence and a decent blazer." She finally looked at me. "That'll do." The waiter appeared, said nothing, poured something from a bottle so old it probably had secrets. Claire ordered for both of us, effortlessly, like she was conducting a silent orchestra. Once the waiter left, she folded her hands. "We're past the show," she said. "Time to talk about what you actually want." I paused, because until now, I had only allowed myself to think in reaction to his betrayal, to her replacement, to their spectacle. I hadn't stopped to articulate what I wanted beyond reclaiming my voice. "I want control of my own name again," I said slowly. "Not just as someone's +1 or ghostwriter." Claire nodded once. "Too small. Try again." I hesitated, then inhaled. "I want to build something that doesn't vanish when a man loses an election or leaves me behind. I want women to remember that silence isn't loyalty. I want to leave fingerprints on policy, culture, the way narratives are shaped around power. I want to matter, independently, undeniably, publicly." Claire didn't flinch. She smiled. "There she is," she whispered. And dinner arrived, and so did the real conversation. She asked questions like a surgeon, precise, unsentimental, Necessary. Do you still love him? No. Do you need the marriage for image control? No. Is there anything he could do to win you back? No. Then why haven't you left yet? I swallowed. Because I want the story to end on my terms, I said, not his. That answer, finally, satisfied her. Good, she said. Now let's talk legacy. She slid a tablet across the table. A folder opened to a mock-up of a nonprofit. The Valentina Initiative tagline, reclaiming civic voices. Mission, training women from underrepresented communities to lead, write policy, and control public narratives in politics, education, and media. There are 12 donors ready to fund the launch, she said. Your story is their opening pitch. My throat tightened. Claire, I haven't even filed for... You don't need to be divorced to build your life, she cut in. You just need to stop letting your marriage be the ceiling. I leaned back. This is fast. No, she said, lifting her glass. This is right on time. He just moved in slow motion, so you forgot what pace looks like. But later that night, after dinner ended and the street lamps painted the sidewalk in gold, she walked me to the curb and handed me a plain envelope. Inside, 3 business cards, 2 handwritten notes, and a check, blank, unsigned, but with the bottom line already stamped, for the foundation of a stage they can't take from you. I stared at it. Why me? I asked. Claire looked at me with something between pride and warning. Because they tried to bury you in the role of someone else's wife, she said, and you climbed out holding a microphone. I walked home alone. The city felt different, not safer, not quieter, but realer, sharper. Every sound had a story. Every step felt deliberate. Even the night air whispered, you're not returning to anything. You're becoming. When I got home, Dominic was waiting, suit off, shirt half open, face unreadable. We need to talk, he said. I hung up my coat, placed Claire's envelope on the counter. About what? I asked. He gestured vaguely. About everything. About us. There is no us, I replied calmly. His eyes flared. You're seriously ending this now? After everything? I turned to him. Not cruel, not bitter. Just done. I'm not ending anything, I said. I'm starting. And then I walked past him, into my office and closed the door. Behind it, drafts of policy outlines, podcast notes, names of women who had been waiting for a voice like mine. And in the corner of the desk, my new business card, Valentina Blackwood founder, speaker, strategist. Dina, it was my speech. Every word, every beat, every pause. I recognized the rhythm the moment he stepped up to the podium, the same cadence I'd used when practicing in front of the mirror, back when I still thought I was writing for us, back when I thought I was building a future we'd share, not one he'd plagiarize for his own applause. The gala was for the city's Education Equity Coalition, a night where real change was supposed to be honored. I hadn't planned on attending, but when one of the board members, a friend I'd mentored years ago, texted me, "You need to be here tonight. He's using your words." I didn't hesitate. I arrived halfway through his speech. The ballroom was dim, the spotlight soft. He stood on stage, tie perfect, voice smooth, soaking in the admiration of a crowd that had no idea they were clapping for my ghost. Education isn't just policy, he said. It's promise. And we break that promise every time we silence the voices of those closest to the classrooms. The students, the mothers, the teachers forgotten in the data. My breath caught. I remembered writing that line in the middle of the night, barefoot in our kitchen, caffeine in my veins and tears I couldn't explain threatening to spill. It wasn't just a sentence. It was my story, and now it was his applause. And I didn't confront him that night, not because I was afraid, because I didn't need to. When the clapping stopped, when the handshakes came, when he stepped off that stage thinking he'd won the room, he saw me, standing in the back, in black, unmoved. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Just enough. He knew. And in that moment, so did I. He wasn't building a legacy. He was recycling mine. And the next day, the speech went viral. Clips posted, quotes shared. Analysts praised him for depth, empathy, maturity. One local columnist even called it his most visionary moment to date. I watched in silence. Then I opened my laptop. I pulled up the original Google Doc, still time-stamped, still under my name. I drafted a post. Calm, controlled, devastatingly clear. This week, I watched someone I used to believe in read a speech I wrote, word for word. without acknowledgement, permission, or integrity. I am no longer surprised by theft disguised as charm, but I am done being silent about it. If you want to hear what I sound like in my own voice, not filtered, not stolen, listen to my next podcast episode. I'm not background anymore. I'm the narrative. I hit publish. And then, everything cracked open. Within hours, the post was everywhere. Not just among my friends or political circles, everywhere. Shared by educators, activists, journalists. Quoted on morning shows. Within a day, her words not, his trended nationally. His campaign issued a clarifying statement. They called it a collaborative effort. Tried to reframe me as part of the team, but the damage was done. Because the women who had been quiet before, the ones who had ghost-written, ghost-managed, ghost-built entire platforms without credit, started coming forward, and they all said the same thing. We've seen this before. On that week, I released the next podcast episode. No music, no intro, just me, my voice, steady, but raw. I told the story, not of betrayal, but of awakening, of being erased, and what it means to reclaim your outline and fill it in with your own color. I didn't mention his name. I didn't need to, because the truth resonates louder than revenge. By the end of the week, the episode had over 600,000 streams. Donors reached out. Organizations asked to collaborate. A university offered to host a panel around the ethics of political authorship. And 3 young women sent me messages that started the same way. I thought I was the only one. And he called, of course. Twice. Left voicemails laced with just enough guilt to sound sincere. Val, I didn't think it would get this far. I meant to give you credit. It was just timing. Timing. The irony. He had spent years telling me I was too early, too emotional, too much. Now he was the one behind schedule. I didn't call back. Instead, I released another episode. This one titled, When They Use Your Voice to Silence You. The board at the Education Equity Coalition issued a public apology. And then, something unexpected happened. Claire called. We're moving faster now, she said. There's space opening up. People want you, not because you're scandal adjacent, but because you're exactly what they feared you might become if you ever stopped hiding. I didn't deny it, because she was right. I was no longer operating in reaction to betrayal. I was building relentlessly, unapologetically, and it was working. Because I had taken back the thing they stole. Not the speech, the story. And the first time I heard my name in a room I wasn't in, I was 23. I'd spent 3 months drafting a research proposal for a senator's environmental task force. I wasn't staff, just an intern, but I'd stayed late every night, cross-referencing studies, editing footnotes, obsessing over language that no one would ever quote. The senator presented it in D.C. the following week, on national television, called it a brilliant staff-driven proposal. Only I wasn't the staff, and my name never came up. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter, that the work mattered, that being seen was secondary to being useful. But I've learned something since then. Visibility isn't vanity. It's proof of impact. And now, after everything, after the betrayal, the gala, the podcast, the plagiarism scandal, my name was finally echoing in rooms that mattered, not as a footnote, not as a whisper, but as a presence. It started with a phone call. Claire again, her tone unreadable. You've been requested, she said. Private roundtable. Policy leaders, civic innovators, media influencers. Why me? I asked. They're not sure what you are yet, she said. And that's exactly what they're curious about. I smiled. Curiosity is dangerous. Claire paused. So is silence. Don't give them that. The meeting was held in a brownstone in Beacon Hill. No signage, no agenda, just powerful people in neutral colors with blank notebooks and expensive pens. I recognized some of them, not from headlines, but from footnotes. The ones who never ran for office but picked who did. The ones who funded 5-year plans and rewrote narratives before the press ever caught on. I expected to feel intimidated. I didn't, because I wasn't there to prove anything. I was there to claim what I already knew. The moderator, a policy consultant with sharp eyes and sharper posture, opened the session with one question. What's the most urgent civic shift we're ignoring? Someone mentioned infrastructure. Another talked about AI. A third said climate migration. Then they turned to me. I said, narrative ownership. The room stilled. I continued. We keep funding leadership development, media training, policy labs, But we never ask, who's writing the story? Who's allowed to shape the language of power? And who's told to be quiet, supportive, strategic, but silent? A few people nodded. One woman leaned forward. I didn't stop. We've built an entire civic culture where women like me are allowed to serve but never to shine. We're allowed to write but not speak, to structure platforms but not stand on them. And when we do speak up, they call it personal drama instead of professional theft. A man across the table, someone from a major media outlet, cleared his throat. But don't you think the tide's turning now? I met his gaze. Calm, direct. No, I think the tide's exposing who's been standing on whose shoulders. And I think we're done being quiet scaffolding. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. That's when I knew. My name had weight now. Not because of a man, not because of pity, but because I had spoken with nothing left to lose, and they heard me. But after the session, the woman who had leaned in, an editor from a major policy journal, pulled me aside. Valentina, she said, we're launching a new column. Female-authored. Long form. No filters. She handed me her card. I want your name on the first byline. That night, walking home through the city, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not because I'd won, because I had stopped waiting for someone else to announce me. And yet, the universe has a sense of irony. When I reached my apartment, Dominic was sitting on the steps, suit wrinkled, tie gone, eyes heavy. You're everywhere, he said, standing slowly. TV, podcasts, events. People keep saying your name like I should have seen it coming. I didn't respond. I unlocked the door. I made mistakes, he said, following me in. But we made this life together. No, I said, turning to face him. I built it while you posed in front of it. He flinched. You think I just used you? I think you forgot I existed when I wasn't useful. Silence. Then, I don't even recognize you anymore. I looked him in the eyes, steady and sure. That's because you never took the time to see me in the first place. He stared at me. Lost, maybe. But it wasn't my job to rescue him anymore. I'm filing, I said simply. He swallowed. So that's it? No, I said, stepping past him. That's finally it. That weekend, I opened my inbox to find the draft of the new column, with my name at the top. No edits, no notes. Just, publish when ready. And so I did. Title, When the Room Finally Says Your Name, Say It Louder. Byline, Dr. Valentina Blackwood. He stood behind the podium like it was built for him. Blue backdrop, subtle flag pin, the lights, the angle, the applause, all calibrated. It was the official launch of his mayoral campaign. The press circled like sharks scented with blood and ambition. Donors packed the first 3 rows. Madison, now with a title, Director of Public Relations, stood just behind him, smiling like she'd won. It was the performance of his life, and I was never meant to be part of it, until I was. I hadn't planned to go. Not to the announcement, not to the press conference, not to anything with his name plastered on it in bold serif font. But that morning, Claire called, her voice unusually clipped. He's using your past as proof of his growth, she said, positioning you as a character arc, a necessary loss. I didn't need to ask how she knew. I trusted her sources. He's rebranding your silence, she added. That was enough. I didn't go to protest. I went to reclaim. Not the man, not the marriage, the narrative. And by the time I arrived, the event was already mid-motion. He had just finished thanking his team, a curated list of loyalists and new faces. He was pivoting now, into the heart of the speech, the rise from the ashes moment, the part where he would frame his personal failings as political strength. And I won't pretend I've always gotten it right, he said, voice full of curated humility. But I've learned, and sometimes the hardest lessons come from those closest to us. There it was. And though that chapter has closed, I owe her, and women like her, my clarity, my drive, and my commitment to doing better. Polite applause, sympathetic nods. Madison beaming like she'd written the line herself. That's when I stepped forward. Not onto the stage, just into the spotlight. A quiet corner of the room, one step closer to the media pit. No microphone, no entourage, just me. And someone noticed. A camera shifted, then another. Reporters turned. One whispered, "Is that..." Another, "She's here." And suddenly, it was like someone had pulled the sound from the room. He saw me. His expression flickered. Only slightly, but enough. Because he knew what I represented now. Not the wife left behind. Not the ghostwriter. Not the stepping stone. I was the stage. And I didn't interrupt him. I didn't need to. He stumbled, just for a breath, enough for people to feel it. His voice wavered. The words lost their shape. And then, something unexpected. Someone called out from the crowd. "Is it true you used her speech?" Another. "Did you ever credit her work?" He tried to recover. "We collaborated." A voice from the press row. She denied that. Publicly. Madison stepped forward, whispering something in his ear. His shoulders stiffened. But it was already too late. The truth had walked in wearing heels. And later, as the room emptied and the post-press chaos hummed around him, I stood outside the hall. Reporters lingered. One asked for a comment. I gave them one. No one owns a woman's story but her. No one gets to edit your silence into their success. Not anymore. The clip made it into the local evening news, and from there, everywhere. That night, I stood on my own stage, not a political one, a real one. A packed auditorium for the Civic Women's Summit, 2,000 attendees, hundreds of thousands watching online. The keynote was mine. No ghostwriter, no husband, no borrowed podium, just me, my voice, my truth. I told them the story, not of my divorce, but of my arrival. I spoke of what it means to be erased while smiling, of power misused, voices borrowed, futures hijacked. I told them that poetic justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in late, soaking wet, and rewrites the entire room. And when I finished, I didn't need applause to feel it. The reclamation, the ownership, the truth echoing finally in my own voice. He ran. He lost. By a margin so wide, it became a punchline in political strategy circles. Madison moved to New York. Claire was offered a national role in a presidential campaign. She turned it down. Said local power is sharper, more surgical. As for me, I published a book, titled, Rain Doesn't Ruin the Moment. It reveals who you are without shelter. It debuted at number 3. Not bad for a woman they once left in the storm.